For this episode, I'm joined by Dr. Asma Fez. She is an associate professor of political science at LUMS. She's done her PhD in political science from Sciences Po in Paris in 2017. And you've done your MSc in political science from the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign back in 2011. And her research focuses are mostly ethnic nationalism, populism, ethnic parties, and federalism. You've published multiple books, articles, received fellowships, grants, awards. So I'm not listing them because the list would probably just go on for like 5 minutes. But I mention all this just to say that it's safe to assume that in your field you're a significant figure. So first of all, I want to thank you for taking out the time to sit with me today. I know our time difference is once again it's quite large. So thank you for sitting down with me.
Thank you very much. I am very happy to be on this podcast. I find it to be rewarding to talk to young women who are in academia, who are about to join academia, who have started their journey. And I mean, this kind of dialogue is always enriching at both ends. So thank you very much for having me over.
And just to kind of remind us about what our conversation is going to be like today, I want our conversation to be for the general public, but I want listeners to be able to understand or see how storytelling is rooted in culture and cultural practices and how it's present in the lives of South Asian women. Personally, I believe that by just sharing stories and talking about different experiences on how women have built their careers and their identity out for themselves while coming from kind of traditional conservative, misogynistic culture, we can build conversations on how, the misogyny-laced stories that we hear from our childhood should be reframed or talked about more just so they can be understood a bit more. Because I think that these stories form our opinions of ourself, of our body, sex, society, and they're passed on from one generation to the next. Again, of course, this isn't to say that every experience is negative or that everyone has negative experiences. Statistically speaking, I think we need to recognize the need for conversation around these topics. So on that note, my first question for you is when I use the word successful or success in terms of like your career or just like for the lives of women in South Asia, how do you understand that? Like, what is success to you?
Okay. Thank you very much. And I do have to say that I think it's a very interesting project that you are conducting. As being a South Asian woman who works in a university in Global South in Pakistan, but who has significant interaction with academia in the US and Europe and UK. It is I do see more women, brown women coming up in academia and working in different fields, which makes me immensely happy because, and we're not just confined to, subjects which are considered to be very typically women oriented, like which has a gender element. We talk about war and peace also, we talk about, taxation also, finance also, larger public policy also, like so many things that we women academics are being able to talk about. And for me, I mean, I come from a conservative family where there wasn't a tradition of women going for higher education and academia. So this was not a very linear or very easy road. But for me, success was that I would be able to basically realize my dream. And my dream was essentially, um, after my undergraduate, etc. I mean, I found myself to be very confused. I knew that I had immense liking and passion for topics related to domestic and international politics. So, comparative politics, international relations, political sociology, were my themes. But all I really wanted basically was to have the ability to think freely, speak freely, and write freely. And this again, comes with adjectives or with quotation marks in some sense, because we are all passing through in different political systems a kind of a democratic backsliding, which has an impact on our ability to say things, whatever the issue, but especially matters of politics. But a career in university for me where I could do research, think about the larger society, think about the problems and their solutions, and then train younger minds about them. That was a dream for me. That was a success for me. So I'm quite happy about it that I was able to achieve those goals.
When you talk, okay, so there's like two things that I kind of picked up from your answer there that I want to like know more about. Growing up, what did the idea of financial independence look like for you? Like, was there something that you saw around you that made you think, I want to replicate this in my own life? Or was there something that made you think, I don't want to be like this, I want to be able to be financially independent for myself?
Honestly, I did not have a lot of understanding of how important, what does it mean to be financially independent, and how significant it can be for a woman's life. So I can say that it took me a while in life to realize that how important it is to be financially independent. For me, the understanding was less clear. It could also be because I did not have women around me who were financially independent in my close family and in my close friends and their families also. So that perhaps I had not seen it, visualized it, that what does it mean to be financially independent. I just wanted to, again, have a career where I could pursue my intellectual and scholarly passions also. But then financial independence came, as one of the benefits of, the career. And the more I, stepped into the field and I started earning, and of course, academia is not a corporate sector. It's not the highest earning, kind of position. But nevertheless, whatever it is that you earn, I began to realize that it added to my independence and autonomy. It gave me freedom to stand up for myself and to give, and for others to take me more seriously.
When you mentioned critical thinking or being able to think and write freely was important to you. That kind of stuck out to me mostly because from my observations, that doesn't seem to be a goal for like most people. Like that's, or at least that's not a conscious choice that you're aware of. Or at least early on in your life, you're not. Maybe as you get the chance to keep growing within your education, you are. So I was still wondering, like, what caused that initial thought that this was something that you wanted to keep following?
I think some of my teachers, that were influence on me. Also, that when I looked at the career choices that I had, so one career choice that used to be presented to me, of course, was to maybe do civil service exam and join bureaucracy and state. And having studied politics, having studied a little bit about the state and having a little bit understanding about how the state is and what does it mean, it means that you become part of that machine. And obviously, like a dysfunctional state is the worst thing. So we need, smart, efficient, effective people to join the state because the state has to deliver to the people. It's the biggest reality in our lives in some sense. But I mean, I would look at my skill set. I would look at my, aptitude and leaning, and I would realize that, I can't be part of the state. I would rather be at a distance and, study it, analyze it, and out of my goodwill, love for, generally for the country, but also for humanity, I would like to hold those who are in power accountable. Or at least, show and speak up wherever I see there is a problem going on. Because it was also related to, my skill set also. Because I really could understand that, that kind of very, rough and tough type of bureaucratic position was not my thing.
That's interesting. And I think that also makes me think of the way that you've moved around through because of your education and career. Like you went from Pakistan to America, and then you came back to Pakistan, and then you went to France, and then you decided to like live and work here as opposed to finding an academic position elsewhere in the world. I guess like
Yes.
part of that is also I was wondering, was that always the goal?
I think several factors contributed to it. One, that I do feel attached to my family and to my land somehow. So I might end up writing very critical stuff about in terms of politics, but that comes out of my love because I think that this country is capable of doing better. really. And that's one thing. So it was overall my attachment to family and to the place which brought me back. Second, the other thing was that and for perhaps people, like in the US, they don't know that in a low to middle income country like Pakistan, in the global south, we can have universities like LUMS, which are state of the art universities where you find like really cutting edge research, whatever is possible under the circumstances, whether it is financial scarcity, whether it is also because, we don't have fancy labs for science, as fancy a lab as it would be the case in an American university. And also there are limits to what we can say about state, about religion, about politics, about gender, about fundamental rights, about conflicts. But at the same time, I have been lucky, I would say, that I'm working at LUMS because LUMS has been able to provide me with that freedom. Also, I would also like to mention that in South Asia, physical safety is a big thing, is a big concern for women. I have been lucky that LUMS has been able to also afford me, provide me a chance to have physical safety as well. So the other thing could have been just counterfactual thinking that if I had not been able to get a job like LUMS or to be, well settled at LUMS, perhaps at some point, only for take out all the other factors, but a woman and her safety and her ability to navigate her day to day life without, being exposed to, constant harassment or anything, that would have perhaps ultimately made me think about leaving Pakistan.
Right.
So I've stayed in Pakistan out of idealism also, but also I've been lucky because I am working at a place which is kind of a bubble. And people say it in a sarcastic way, but when you are surrounded by madness, bubbles are beautiful.
I like that. That's very interesting. That's my first time hearing that from a South Asian woman, actually.
But I also have to say that, having gone to like, multiple academic engagements abroad, LUMS used to be compared to Ashoka
Okay.
in India as these two like places which were bastions of or which became like a sort of a platform where you could do research without fearing for the consequences. Unfortunately, from what I know and what I have known through colleagues and academic contexts, even in case of Ashoka, that has come down. I don't know how long will it continue for LUMS, but we are engaged in a battle to continue to maintain some kind of freedom. So in that sense, LUMS is very exceptional.
I guess through all of your stories, I'm also wondering, in your perspective, in your opinion, how would you understand failure?
Can one also be personal
Yeah, of course. Be
in
personal.
these conversations?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't want to say it for others because for everyone it means different things also. I have seen friends who have settled down and I have seen their professional priorities change. Obviously, with children, for example, then they become the first priority also. In my case, I would say that so there was the author Abdullah Hussain, and he ended up writing a long story which was also dramatized. And I don't think I have ever usually mentioned this to people, but I remember that watching it when I was essentially 15, 16, actually reading that book and seeing its dramatization in Pakistan television, where you have this character and that woman gets killed by her husband because, like she has gotten married, husband adores her, she has a kid, her material needs are being met, but she's just dissatisfied with that life because this is not the only thing that she wanted in life. So she keeps on, like, as the story goes, she keeps on neglecting her domestic responsibilities. She's assumed to be not a good mother, not a good wife. She's ungrateful because how dare she not recognize, how much he loves her? Ultimately, to the extent that, like a jealous husband, he feels that maybe she's having a fling with someone and he ends up killing her. And she had no fling with anyone. It's just that she would just say till the end that this isn't enough for her. And I remember when I watched it and I realized, and different things happened in my life also. And I remember that I was like, somebody is able to express what I feel. That even if I have, lots of money and lots of servants and an adoring partner and lots of beautiful kids or whatever, it's just not enough for me. I want something more because I do think that I can contribute to this world beyond just the boundaries of, the four walls of my house. If women who do make those contributions, and you and I and all of us have been made and shaped by such women who have held the fort and who have made us what we are. But for me, I realize that it's just not enough. I will never be happy. Like, somehow through fiction, I got this realization. So for me, if I was not able to achieve what I was able to do in my career, I would have been very depressed. I might still be depressed, but that would have been a different level of depression and thinking of it like a failure.
I think that's very important. That also like kind of highlights what or why reading fiction or why just reading in general is important. All types of humanities art that you create, whether it be like a film or television or novel, like it always speaks to something and it's supposed to help you criticize and understand what's happening around you.
Yes, and also that I would like to add that sometimes helps us understand ourselves, express ourselves also, and which is why I'm with you on AI.
But when I say storytelling or storytelling in culture, how do you understand that?
I think it's very important in our culture also because I've seen this, and there was a point in life, and I guess we move through different stages in life and we evolve. Our thinking also changes and evolves. So I belong to a very, in some sense, a very traditional Punjabi family and generation of women, smart, bright, brilliant women with strong nerves. They have raised wonderful children. They have done their bit in life. They have held the households together, etc. And lots of stories heard, from like, neighborly gossips from our, ancestral village to essentially, success stories to women sharing, their fears. I remember my aunts, were like, way older than my mother also, or my own mother, who was never a working woman, who was not highly educated, but, telling her stories also. And as I move forward in life, and I realized that how significant, like how at that time I could not appreciate that how much I related to those, or how much that also helped me think about things. Now I can look back and I see and I feel that this is a very nice part of our culture also. Of course, then it is going to be what your culture also is about. So it's going to be about women needing to get married, like in a Jane Austen world. It's going to be about, like, men doing certain things or whatever. But I do think that there is a conventional wisdom. Sometimes it helps, sometimes it doesn't help. But I have come to value and respect it more now.
When you see it as good or important, are there specific stories that come to your mind that lead you to think that?
Yes, like sometimes stories about resilience. Like I remember a story about, this woman from our village, my mother's side of the village, who became a widow early on and then who never remarried, but in a time period where women were not going out of the household and not being independent, being so steadfast and so courageous, raising her family, etc. Like I remember hearing about it. This was a woman who used to live in the village, and when we would, during my school years in summer vacations, we will go for a week or 10 days. And usually she would come and, she would find out that we were there from Islamabad and she would visit,
Yeah.
who faced the odds in life, very difficult life, and somehow was able to walk through life with me, keeping her dignity intact and, doing what she wanted to do, which was to raise her children also. So, like, sometimes stories of resilience. Sometimes, now that, when I travel between Lahore and Islamabad very frequently because, one side is home, the other side is also home, but I work. So passing through the Chenab River that one passes through, and the traditional stories of love, for instance, that romance isn't just a Western thing, that it has been there in our cultures also.
Yes.
So Chenab is famous for traditional characters like Soni Mahiwal, where Soni was so deeply in love with Mahiwal that she drowned. And but the point is that our culture has had, and the land that we come from, Punjab, has also had, like, so many different kinds of stories. So whether it is sometimes, like a love story or a story of strength or a story of resilience, I really like it. I don't know how to say that, but Soni tried to cross the Chenab River on a ghada. And the ghada was like, it's made of clay.
Right.
So it broke
Oh, okay.
and she drowned.
Oh,
Yeah. But she was going to meet Mahiwal.
okay.
Like, we only know about Romeo and Juliet because Shakespeare immortalized them, but we have these, stories in our culture as well.
Now, because I'm interested in like South Asian culture and the way stereotypes are ingrained in us from a young age, the way I've seen and experienced it, I think a lot of the times there's barriers that it creates for women in their like personal lives and how they see themselves, what they should do, who they should marry, how they should present themselves. Can you think of a moment personal to you, either from your life or someone you know, where you recognize storytelling or like being able to tell stories or share them, making a difference?
Here, I have not a very optimistic example,
Oh,
not a very positive example,
yeah.
because I was also thinking, because I see this now, like, being a teacher, being a mentor to young undergrad students. So lots of, like, female students, young girls, they come into LUMS. And usually coming into LUMS means that, you are coming from a certain kind of affluent background, a certain kind of class category, etc. I see that, in our interactions in class break, after class, office hours, here and there, that there are some who really have been, like, who have, sort of that attitude that, there is too much male dominance in the society. The script of my life has been written, but I will not let anybody dictate the script of my life. I sometimes get surprised, and it happened recently, like, on the day of the final exam of spring semester, that one of my basically brightest students, she essentially told me that during her sophomore year, she's going to get married. I was just shocked because she is very bright. And she said, well, I have been told from the beginning that this is the most important thing, and I have no independent agency here. There's nothing that I can do. So, my whole bargaining deal, which I hope will continue, which my parents as well as my in-laws and my partner will hopefully respect, is that they will allow me to get a bachelor's degree from LUMS also. I was just like, have you thought about, how bright you are? And, it almost, reminded me of the movie Mona Lisa Smile also, because, culture predicting a certain kind of, gender role, telling you this is your space, this is not your space. And you have heard so many stories about it, and so much socialization and cultural influence has been there that you have accepted it just like that. that, what happened in 1926 is going to happen in 2026 also.
Right.
So in that way, I said what I had to say to the student, but I also, obviously, she's part of a family. She's a young kid. She doesn't want to, do anything about it. She said, I'll try to think positive, that everything will work out. I said, I wish that everything will work out for you, but practical life is very difficult, etc. So even for this generation who is going to a university like LUMS, who are in their undergrads, late teens, I see that the stories, the meta narratives that come from families, elders, culture, media, they have such defining impact. Some are completely shaped by them, some go towards rebellion. But a lot of them are completely shaped by them. So I wanted to give example of this current generation, newer generation, people from your generation, that I see this happening. And even at a place like LUMS, sometimes LUMS and the liberal arts education is too weak in front of those very made images of, very linear path through life that is given to girls.
This is part of why I was going to ask, like, when I say stereotypes or cultural stereotypes, what kind of woman do you think these stereotypes create?
Thou shall not work outside home.
Yeah.
Thou shall get married before 25 or by 25, because then the shelf life will be over. Thou shall not get too much education in case you make another man feel insecure, because they have to be much more accomplished than you. So those kinds of
Right.
things, the emotional, the physical, the inner, outer life of a woman is predetermined.
Yeah.
And it is also changing. I now, for example, I was just talking to someone just before this podcast. In Lahore and in Islamabad, we see so many girls now on scooties. And I absolutely love it, because they have freedom. They're not dependent on anyone. कि ये आएंगे and then they will give me a ride and then that's how I will go there. Whether it is getting your groceries, or whether it is getting to your medical college, or whether it is delivering food panda, something like that. I see that there are changes also happening in society, but maybe right now those changes are confined to main urban centers. And hopefully, gradually, there will be a ripple effect and it will spread. But a conventional thinking that exists even in urban centers, even in well to do, educated families, which is also very importantly, I have to say, further cemented by popular culture, by television dramas, which is that ultimately a successful woman is the woman who has a husband and who has children and who's owned by a man and possessed by a man, and whose life revolves around, taking care. And caregiving is a beautiful thing. There's absolutely nothing wrong in caregiving, but to tell a human being that this is all that you can do and nothing else, so that is problematic. So those stereotypes still exist. Nevertheless, I also, again, I'm repeating myself, I have to say that this is also a society like other societies which is passing through a transition. Pakistan is a young society. As per UNDP, 64% of the population. Imagine, this is more than half of the population which is young, under the ages of 35. People who have been exposed to social media. This is hundreds of millions of people. So this is also ultimately changing as well. But it's a battle that is to be fought. And that is going on every day.
That makes me wonder, growing up for you, at least like up to a certain point, whatever that point may be, did you experience those stereotypes being reinforced on you? Because at some point, if they were, like, you had to break out of it, right?
Yes, and it was a very painful struggle. So, for instance, that to an academic, an American leading American academic with whom I'm working on a project, and after the project meeting, we started talking about it. So suddenly, this issue came up because I am a Fulbright fellow. I was awarded the Fulbright, And I was telling her that when I was about to leave for my Fulbright, I mean, my parents, being very conventional parents, were concerned that once I get the Fulbright done and live in America on my own for a bit, I will be basically, for most of the people, I will be ineligible because, who knows what have I done also. So I remember that particular summer when I was leaving for Fulbright, I felt like I was torn. I was also scared that am I making the right decision? Because what have I seen in life? I've seen nothing in life. Perhaps all these people who have seen much more in life, they know more. What if I make the most colossal mistake of my life and there's no turning back? So I decided that I will be out of this curiosity. Like, I will go to some. There was a very famous psychiatrist, I mean, who was at a local, whom I had seen on TV actually. I decided to quietly go and seek an appointment with him. And basically, I thought, okay, maybe psychiatrist will have some advice. I got out of the room disgusted because he said to me, he said, if I were you and I had a choice to pursue education or to get, the best catch of a young man, bingo, it's not even a choice. So I said, what do you mean? Like, what is the easy choice? He said, the man. Because if you do your Fulbright, then I'm pretty sure you will not get such a man. And I was just like, oh wow. So I after meeting that psychiatrist, I was like, I am going to Fulbright. I am going to America. Like really, I was so disgusted that, this is a man who has a degree, who cannot even, who's unwilling to even entertain this inner battle that is going on within me. Nope, thank God he's not my therapist.
That also points to that one stereotype that you, or at least I've heard like older men in Pakistan say, which is and I'll translate it because they say it in Urdu, obviously. Girls when they go out, or girls who live abroad, quote unquote, they're used up. We've talked a lot in length about this in previous episodes, but I think it is very important to mention again, for a majority of us, we see women and women's bodies as an object, and an object of sex.
Yes.
A lot of that also ties into why whenever there's any kind of scenario of like harassment or assault, the blame is also always on like how covered up was she, which is just like associating everything on like all responsibility on the woman and how she dresses, as opposed to the fact that there's a very real like societal problem that continues even if the woman is the female is like 6 years old or 20 or 50 or fully
85,
okay.
they still get tripped.
Yeah. Or even if it's an animal.
Yes.
When we think about it, these social structures align a lot of responsibility on the woman with little to no freedom. And this, I also thought of this when you were talking about how the doubt in your mind was on there's people who've seen a lot more in life. And that made me kind of think about women in Pakistan aren't really allowed to experience anything. A majority of their life is like they can be allowed to go to school, but they're supposed to return back home and never actually do anything else. So that in itself is a barrier, like the exposure and experience that you are allowed to have, but
Exactly.
as opposed to a man who can just go out and have it is very different.
Absolutely agreed. Absolutely agreed, which is why even a small thing like the arrival of electronic scooties in Pakistan,
Mm-hmm.
because I still to this day don't have an understanding of the street, because
Right.
I wasn't just, in my childhood allowed to roam around the street the way boys are. And I'm not saying necessarily that it's a good thing to just, be out and about. What I'm saying is understanding of the society, understanding of the road, that street smartness. I don't have that. So I'm so happy when I see girls who are able to just pick up a scooty and go, because they're getting something that I don't have, because I wasn't, I came from a conservative middle class family. And I mean, and it's still the same. I have students who don't know that, there is a poor Christian colony like 15 minutes away from our university. They have never seen it, because the family keeps them so sheltered. And this, so that is one thing. And two, I want to say that this sexualization of women's bodies and then bringing custom in it, culture in it, honor, religion,
Yeah.
everything, like that is very problematic and it continues to this day. Pakistan, unfortunately, even in cities like Karachi and Lahore, which are mega cities now, which are huge cosmopolitan centers where you have a mixture of class, ethnicity essentially living, honor killings are reported. Women are still considered by male members to be possession of their honor, a part of their honor, that if she decided to go and get married to someone, they have a right to take her life away. So, like this kind of, I'm not trying to give a bad name or, paint that all is bleak because I am also here. But the fact of the matter is that we have a long way to go. We have a long way to go to recognize that women are also human beings. Pakistani social media, and again, social media, one can also say sometimes I feel like, social media, and when you read those comments, they bring out the worst in people. But, like, if you have a celebrity, an actress who's wearing a kind of a daring, kind of a rather bold dress or something, deep neck or anything, and then, you'll have automatically, I know, somebody down there would have written, is this Islamic Republic of Pakistan? Yes, it is Islamic Republic of Pakistan. It's fine. It can be Islamic Republic of Pakistan, but like immediately. And especially for rape victims and harassment victims, why was she out at night? Why was she alone? What business did she have? Like in today's newspapers in Pakistan, the one major news that exists is that there was this horrendous murder, and you would probably remember it, of this girl Noor Muqaddam in F7 in Islamabad who was beheaded.
Yeah.
And then the guy was a therapist
Yeah.
who pleaded insanity. And for as gruesome a crime as this, there were today's news is that the guy had appealed against his death sentence because Pakistan has lifted a moratorium on death penalty. Death penalty exists. He tortured the girl. She, for more than one day, assaulted her, cut her into pieces. I'm sorry, but in my view, sometimes one should go for, the maximum death penalty.
Mm-hmm.
And the Supreme Court of Pakistan today has upheld that death penalty. But even in, you would not think that there can be another opinion about this case.
Yeah.
Till like, but why was Noor Muqaddam? Why did she go and meet Zahir? Why was that girl at that guy's house? Like victim blaming goes to the nth degree here.
I am in the fortunate position that I've been at a distance from this for like the last like what 5 years, 4 years. But even now, when I'm like sitting outside and like it's a picnic, there's families and children and everyone's like around me, they're having their own time. Passively, one thought that I will always have in my head is like if my younger cousins or anyone was here, if my family was here, maybe they'd be able to see all these women wearing like shorts and t-shirts and realize that this is normal and that women's bodies are not sex objects and that there is absolutely nothing wrong with wearing shorts when it is extremely hot outside. There's nothing sexual about it.
I'm sorry, but one of our former prime ministers was the object of so many women's affection
Yeah.
because he was very good looking.
Yeah.
He ended up saying that, since Pakistan was close to default and there were all kinds of administrative financial crises, but you know how everyone likes life made easy, world's problems made easy. Give a simplified answer to world's complex problems. And who basically said that, Pakistan's decay is because there is moral decay. And moral decay is because women are getting, more and more women are getting divorces. They are getting impressed by Western cultures. They wear jeans and they get divorces. Now, if a man who has millions and millions following him would say this, obviously, like, the effect that it will have, it is really sad. And I totally relate to what you are saying. I know, for example, like whenever I have done fellowships or whenever I have done, like when, for example, when I was in Paris for my PhD, and I remember coming back and where I used to live, there was a very nice jardine, very nice garden. and I will see, like a girl lying, playing guitar, lying on the grass, playing guitar, enjoying herself without being looked upon, catcalled upon, touched upon, sexualized, etc. And I would say these are the simple joys of life that I can sit by the roadside. So I would love roadside cafes. And whenever I go abroad, I love roadside cafes just to sit at the side of the road, enjoy my coffee and my book. I can't do this in Pakistan.
Mm-hmm.
It's not possible.
Yeah.
Because if a woman is exercising in a park, there will always be some peeping Tom
Yeah.
making a video. But also just like, there is not acceptance. There isn't an acceptance that women can be fully in public spaces. Another thing that I notice in Islamabad and Lahore, the two cities that I know a little bit, is, the cafe culture. And I see now girls sitting with their laptops, trying to do whatever. So it's wonderful because this is something which is very common in, in US, in UK, in America, that, you don't want to be inside the house all day. So you go to a public place, you spend a few hours there, you do your creative work, or you just relax, sip on your latte, read a nice book, because you have every right to be out of the house.
Mm.
So at least in Lahore and Islamabad, I see more and more cafes coming up, which have, this kind of culture where students, including female students, are also sitting there. So again, like those stereotypes that we're talking about, they are a reality of the society too, but it's also a society in transition. So where more and more young women are also like trying to acquire some space for themselves, whether it is just space in the head or whether it is a space outside on the road or in a park to do yoga, etc. But again, right, the dominant trend is those conventional, stereotypes.
Right. And I think one thing that I noticed a lot growing up, but even like see sometimes in comments, is like when it comes to these topics of victim blaming or why was she there? Why was that? One thing that you'll hear a lot is someone say, no, in Islam, women are expected to cover up and men are supposed to lower their heads. Both things should happen. Which, me personally, I hate it every time I hear that because only one of those things is happening and it's not the men lowering their gazes. So to use that as an excuse and as like rationalizing every bad thing that men do to women in this country. The bigger point here that I'm trying to get to, not just to rant, is how accepted that is, but the way that that became a thought, like a rationalization, like it became legitimate, is to just social institutions that we have around us rationalizing it. And one of those institutions, at least for me, or like what comes to mind, is the way motherhood rationalizes all of this for all of us, men and women both.
Because they are also product of the same cultural system.
I guess to like make this more like, well, actually the point of this recording is you, not like the institutions and the structures. So what I meant was like when we think about motherhood in this way, how do you understand or conceptualize that? Like how was I introduced to you?
Well, I mean, I have to say two things. A, that, because I haven't directly,
Yeah.
I've indirectly experienced motherhood,
Yeah.
but through nieces, nephew,
Yeah.
through friends and their kids, etc. So I haven't directly, but I have been raised by a mother, and I see friends and mothers are a huge influence. Even when I see a messed up boy, I sometimes think that, this messed up boy is, I'm sorry to use this word, but like, not showing respect to female colleagues, etc.,
Yeah.
or feeling superior or finding ways of, showing superiority or a sense of superiority, etc. It also comes from home.
Yeah.
So I do think that, family culture, family's way of doing things, mothers especially, how do they imagine themselves as their position in the world? Because then they pass it on to their coming generations, both sons and daughters, essentially. That's a huge influence. And which is why I also think, and sometimes it's really disappointing. I'm saying disappointing because I have some very, qualified friends, highly educated women, women who became medical doctors, women who became chartered accountants, etc. Now, either it was because of the choice, and when these societies like ours hopefully will change in terms of more autonomy and perhaps some semblance of equality across genders, between genders, women, mothers will have to be at the forefront of it.
Your own house demands like women to be covered up and just like isolated and put in like a very like specific box, and you're going to think that that's normal and expected for every single woman out in society, as opposed to accepting the differences. And that's always been a problem for me, because why can a man in like Desi households, like they can roam around even shirtless if they want to, but the women's heads have to be covered and they have to have the dupatta, which isn't normal for every family. For most of my friends, it was not the norm, but in a lot of places that I've seen, that happens to be the norm. That's why, like, even when we do talk about this society in transition, I think it's also important to note that majority of the people, majority of the middle class, lower middle class, and below are not going through that.
Somebody narrated this story, and I met someone who had written extensively and a very, famous expert, and who basically said to me that whenever this person visits villages in Sindh, it could be a Punjabi village also, by the way. There is no Sindhi exceptionalism here because that traditional conservative society. So he said that I asked about, the modernization revolution coming in Pakistan and youth and technology. And I said, what could be the factor? What is most important thing that has been developed that you think will have a transformative effect? So he said, well, based on my, field trips to villages, I think maybe mobile phone, cell phones. I was like, how? So mentioned that, this expert had been visiting villages for a number of years, for decades, doing different, field work and research. And the village elders now, in the last 10 years, started saying girls have just started to develop links with boys. Now, all you need is a cell phone to be able to talk to a guy. So, even if you physically confined a girl to the four walls of the house, there are still ways that the girl will be able to talk to a boy. So, this person said that he was really amused when village elders, in a very despondent way, said, our civilization is gone because of this tiny thing, cell phone. I really enjoyed this.
Are you ready to head into like the final little bunch? I guess I also want to, in a way, take advantage of the fact that most of my guests for this project, currently at least, are scholars or academics in the field. So, with that in mind, is there a theoretical or literary framework or text that you'd suggest other people to read?
That's a very difficult question because my work is more on state and politics, those kinds of things, institutions. So it's not directly anthropological or sociological. I would say that there is an iconic Sindhi writer, Nurul Huda Shah, despite being product of the society that she was part of. In her 20s, she wrote these iconic dramas, which were, and it is amazing, remarkable. One finds, videos of them on YouTube and maybe with English subtitles also, because it wasn't just about the Sindhi society or class inequality or the oppression of feudalism or the suppression that women face. It was like all of this. And in the last month, I think in early May, I was able to meet her because she visited LUMS for a workshop or anything. It was quite enlightening, and I was reminded of those dramas, and maybe I will rewatch them. But again, they're not the happiest one, but they reflect the society. Or I also have to say that iconic novel, Rivers of Fire, Aag Ka Darya by Quratul and Heather. Again, in Urdu fiction, it's a classic. But the woman's character in it is, and again, it's the history of the subcontinent, and it has everything. It has, invasions, military conquests, yes, colonialism, the British arriving, women, and through centuries, etc. The scope is so wide, and within it all, at the center of it is also like a very strong woman, essentially. And somehow that strong subcontinental woman, against all odds, has traveled through history, etc. I first read it and I was just simply in awe. I mean, this is also the region that I am part of, because this region is also home to, since I'm sorry to say this, but because of the current Persian Gulf crisis, the word civilization and who has civilization and who doesn't have a civilization that has come up again and again. I mean, South Asia is home to some of the oldest civilizations, like the Indus Valley civilization, etc. I read that in a book of fiction, Kuratul and Heather's Aag Ka Darya, Rivers of Fire, and just set my mind on fire.
One last question. Do you have a question for like a fellow scholar or a suggestion on something that you think they should work on or they should consider working on?
I think we need more women in academia.
Yeah.
And our societies, meaning the societies in the global south, in South Asia, or also let me draw on another category, Muslim societies.
Yeah.
There's so many forms of inequalities, and gender inequality is one of them. And there are other forms of inequalities also. And I do think that whether it is inequality, whether it is a question of human rights, political rights, gender rights, whether it is like imagining the nation, imagining the republic, fundamentally, I just really hope that more women will come and start asking these questions, because when women ask these questions, there's a certain, different nuance that, and it's no disrespect, because some of the most phenomenal works that have helped me open up the black box of, like, let's say, state, political parties, institutions, federalism, etc., populism, they have, those works have been done by male scholars, but I think there is room for us women to make contribution in so many of those fields. We should use our minds, our intellect, our imagination, and read and write about them.